you ready?
So we're looking into the Zoom, right?
Yep.
Okay.
I can see you both just fine.
Have what number?
Now, does she turn around and talk to me, or is
Yeah,
she
I'm
just
gonna just-
talking into?
Yeah, we'll just do a conversation like this.
You'll just be having a conversation.
And then I have this laptop open with some questions. In case they come in.
Okay, you guys are on.
Good evening, Melissa Andrews here with lead investigator Brian Duggar. First time in the building in a long time.
It's been 15 months, I believe. So
15 months, both vaccinated. So we're here to have a conversation tonight about the 2011 murders of Johnny Clarke and Lisa Straub in Holland, Ohio, inside Lisa's parents' home. And you did a 3-part series on this. Kind of just refresh people about this murder and what interested you in it.
yeah, what really interested me was that, I've been in the Toledo area since 1998, and this was just a killing that really stuck out to me because it just isn't something you typically see. I mean, you don't typically see somebody getting killed in Holland. For one, I was actually looking through old police records or the police reports, and I don't know if they've had a recent murder. And the fact that, it was a young couple, it was an upscale house, and the method of killing, this isn't something we see. I mean, it wasn't a stabbing or a shooting. I mean, they had bags over their heads and they were suffocated. And, I mean, there's just a lot of different angles to this story. And it just stuck out in my head.
And if you've been keeping along with the story over the last 10 years, if you have seen the 3 stories that Brian Duggar put together or seen any of our coverage on WTOL.com or YouTube, you've kind of seen how this has played out. And one person, Sam Williams, was arrested and convicted of the murders. But even the police have said, which you pointed out yourself, the fact that the victims had bags over their heads, there were 2 of them, the house was ransacked. It'd be very difficult for one person, just Sam Williams, to pull off these murders.
Yeah, I mean, everybody agrees about that. I mean, there was no way. I mean, Johnny Clarke, he was a big guy, a strong guy. I mean, a really strong guy. I mean, one person was just not going to overpower him. And there was actually evidence at the scene that the door leading out to the garage, there was some sort of damage to it. So the thought was that, Johnny had got back into the house and he was trying to barricade the door and keep it shut, and people forced their way in. And that certainly isn't something that one person was going to do. And there were at least 6 sets of unknown DNA found in the house. So there are clearly more than 1 or even 2 people. I mean, I would guess there has to be at least 4 or 5 people involved.
One of the things that Sam Williams' conviction really hinged on was the fact that his DNA was found on a cigarette butt right inside that garage door that you were talking about. But one of the questions that I had is, couldn't that cigarette had been dropped there the day before or 2 days before? Lisa Straub's parents were out of town. How can you convict someone of murder based on something like that?
Yeah, there's another Cameo Petaway's DNA was also on that cigarette, and Cameo Petaway's trial was occurring simultaneously to Sam's, and Judge James Bates, he actually threw Cameo's case out because he said that very thing, that somebody could have come in and just dropped that cigarette inside the house, and it doesn't mean that Cameo put it there, it doesn't mean that Sam put it there,
or that he killed someone there.
Yeah, I mean, just because the cigarette was there, that cigarette had nothing to do with the killing. It wasn't like, I mean, there were sets of DNA found on the duct tape and on Johnny's clothing, but that DNA was not Sam Williams or Cameo Petaway. So
we do have one question while we're on the topic of DNA right now, coming from Mindy, who says, when is the last time that DNA was used in this case?
Yeah,
investigated.
I know the last piece of evidence that was tested by the state BCI was in 2013. Now, I don't know if that was specifically DNA, but that was the last evidence tested. I do know that the sheriff department some of the detectives involved in this case were recently down at the BCI lab, and they were talking to some of the lab technicians there and asking them, hey, is there anything you need from us? Is there anything else we can give you? And they're like, no, we have everything. So if we get some sort of hit in CODIS, we'll let you know. But BCI, I mean, they just do that traditional type of DNA testing. There's other types of techniques that have come along since 2013, which they would need to take to a private lab.
And I know in the past when I've done crime stories, police and prosecutors are not huge fans necessarily of DNA because a lot of people who are potential jurors will expect that evidence at every crime scene because they're so used to watching kind of those crimey shows, the CSIs. Where's the DNA? Why isn't there DNA? If you want me to, convict, or if you want me to say this person's guilty, I need to have DNA. That's not always left at these crime scenes.
No, it isn't. In this case, the one thing that multiple people told me is that it's amazing how clean the scene really was. And you look at some of the pictures and like the bedrooms, things were thrown out of the dressers and the dresser was top knocked over. But the rest of the house, it was really well kept. I mean, Mrs. Straub kept a really clean house, and it was a clean house. So there just wasn't a lot of evidence. I mean, they found some DNA on Johnny's phone, the battery to the phone. They found it on the duct tape inside of his sweatpants. But, there are other things laying around the house, and it did not have fingerprints. It did not have DNA. So strange to say, but it was a pretty clean crime scene.
We have a question from Jeff who says, Brian, when reading the post-arrest jailhouse phone recordings, did that confirm to you that Sam Williams and Pettaway were involved?
Well, that was a big thing with the jury, that they played snippets of these jailhouse phone calls. And one of them, I think when Cameo called him, he said, hey, Killa, what's up? And the prosecutor seized on that and said, see, he's calling him a killer. That's because he's a killer. But, when I talked to Cameo actually and family, and, this is just what they said. They said, Cameo, when he was in the junior high, he wanted to be a rap artist. And he said, I was going to do Killa lyrics. And so they said his nickname ever since he was in junior high was Killa. But I mean, there are other jailhouse, and they only played parts of it. And I do have the entire transcript, all these phone calls. And, Sam gave me explanations for them, and it sounds reasonable to me. It doesn't mean that that's true, but it sounds reasonable. And what the prosecutors did, they just took snippets that sounded really bad.
So it's kind of eliminating the context in which the conversation was happening, but they can do that.
Absolutely. I mean,
but the defense knows the evidence that the prosecution has. So why didn't they have, or did they have the whole conversation ready to be revealed and a kind of a rebuttal to that?
Well, I mean, that's a really good question. And I don't want to criticize Jane Roman and John Thebes, but sure, I mean, after a trial is over, it's easy to second guess. And the one issue they really had with Sam Williams is that even by his own admission, when he talked to me, I mean, he was not an angel. He was not a good guy. He was dealing drugs. He was prostituting out his wife. He was involved in a lot of bad things. And sometimes if you bring up certain evidence, that opens it up for the prosecutor to jump in there and say, oh, well, now that you mentioned that, let's talk about this prostituting your wife or whatever. So
one of the things that I want to touch on too is when, you talk about it being Holland and a nice home and a young couple, but as you watch some of these interviews, these kids were into some drugs, they were into buying and selling, they were driving around. Some of the people who were interviewed smoking pot in the car. These were not, when you say Holland young kids, they had another lifestyle.
Well, I mean, certainly some of the people that they hung out with were very involved in that. And I know Johnny's mom made a big effort to try to keep him away from some of these people. But I mean, you look at the cast of characters that
Right.
that he was friends with. I mean, many of them did have many drug convictions, and they did have many assault type convictions. And so you're right. I mean, it wasn't typically the kid that you would see that goes to Springfield, and I mean, a lot of these weren't. I mean, they're East Toledo kids, and
So really, Lisa was the Springfield connection, and then
Mhm.
Johnny was from the East Side, and those people that he was connected with in those interviews, they were from the East Side as well. So that's how they knew Lisa, hanging out and things like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Okay, we have a question from Katrina, who says the police gave Eric information to seek Sam. Sam is not guilty. Sam's phone pinged on the East Side at 10:27, and the murder happened at 10:41, 30 minutes away. And that's something that you addressed in one of your pieces.
Yeah, I mean, that was something I know he brought up in one of his appeals, that look, all my phone records were, they said I was on the East Side the whole time. I mean, of course, you can certainly argue. I mean, Sam even told me that he had 3 different phones. So is it possible that, that phone was left somewhere to create an alibi? I mean, certainly, because we don't know what he's doing with his other phones, but certainly the records that I have and have reviewed, I mean, he was on the East Side.
Johnny was not from the East Side, though.
He was not.
Okay, where was he from?
That's actually a good question. I don't
Okay.
really.
Okay, but he
I
did
think
know
he
these
was
people.
just from. Trying to think of the high school. He went to Toledo High School.
Mhm. South End. His mother says on Danbury Street.
Okay.
He went to Harvard and Burroughs by
Okay.
Burndale and Bowsher. Okay.
Right.
But
Bowsher,
he did
that's what I
know
think of.
he did know these people.
Mhm.
Let's talk about how would all these people know that Lisa's parents were on a vacation? I mean, who would know that?
Well, I mean, that's a big thing because, okay, so we know that the people broke into the house when their parents were on a 25th anniversary cruise. So I'm guessing if somebody were going to break into that house, they would want to break in when the parents were not home. So immediately that probably should tell you, and it certainly told the investigators, that it probably was somebody that they knew. So, and the thing was, Johnny had not been over there. There's still some confusion in my mind as to whether he was just over there to kind of house sit while the parents were gone, or whether he was staying over there for a couple weeks. But they kind of went back and forth between Lisa's and Johnny's family. But some of Johnny's friends didn't even know exactly where that house was. There were only a few
Mhm.
people who actually knew that
Mhm.
information.
Mhm. Let's talk about motive too. In these interrogations, you see that money, Alex Cousino alleged that Johnny owed other people money. She admitted that she thought someone would be in this because he owed them money, though she admitted she didn't know anyone else that did except for her because of this car that she had bought from him but refused to pay him the rest of the money. And then there was talk about there being money in the house that belonged to the parents.
Yeah, there really was this big rumor going around the street. And, I think at some point somebody said they overheard Johnny, and then somebody else told me that they overheard Lisa say that there is money in the house. And the big rumor was that there was this safe that was in the house and it had like $100,000 in it. Now, I talked to the family and they said the only thing that was in that house really was $40 that they left for pizza. So, I mean, that was simply not true.
Let's talk more about Alex Cousino because we're getting a lot of comments about her. And she's someone I think that you've been very interested in. And, we cannot speculate or convict people.
No.
But she did, I think, spark an interest in a lot of people, including yourself, her interrogation.
Yeah, I mean, she really did. I mean, when you look at the motive, I mean, clearly her and Johnny had a big falling out, right? I mean, there was this car that, the circumstances of how she ended up buying this car from Johnny is certainly disputed. I mean, she said Johnny wouldn't leave her alone, and there were, but anyhow, so there was this car that's certainly worth much more than $1,500. She offered to pay him, and then she didn't pay him. She only paid him half of it, and then a wheel fell off.
She
And
insinuated that he really needed the money, and so he said, buy this car for me, buy this car for me, take it off my hands.
that is what she said. Other people have told me that that wasn't the case
What do they
at all.
say?
Well, that she basically got him to give the car to her, and
So do you think there's a dynamic between them that hasn't been discussed? Why would he just give her this car for $1,500 that was worth much more?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I know a story that's going out there is that Johnny may have been. I don't want to speculate on that,
Okay.
but
Well, there are some things that digging around in this that we just can't say because of legal reasons, probably.
we can. I mean, look, Alex was never charged. I mean, she gave her DNA readily, and
And none of her DNA matched.
none of her DNA matched, but certainly there are red flags about her, not to mention the fact that just days after this murder, she had found a woman's phone number and like her boyfriend's phone, and she really flipped out on this lady, and I guess they saw each other at a store or something, and Alex, which she actually had to read in court, threatened her and said, look, you know who I am, we're the people that tie people up and do this, so watch yourself, sort of thing. So
And that seems aggressive.
yeah.
Okay. What about her? And I know in her interrogation, she talked about Zach, who we'll talk about as well, because he's kind of a big name in this, that he had taken a polygraph once, but he was drugged up, according to the police. And so he didn't, they kind of let it go. And then they did another one, which the police said that he failed. These are not admissible in court.
Right.
Did she ever take a polygraph?
As far as I can tell, she did not. I don't know that for sure. They offered certain people polygraphs, and I don't know the list that was not in the records of everybody, but I do not believe that they gave her a polygraph. They did not give Sam Williams a polygraph either until, after he had already been convicted.
So seeing all this, you've spent hundreds of hours talking on the phone, reading through these documents, watching these videos. What surprised you the most about this case?
Well, what really surprised me is how many possibilities there were. I understand that in my mind, I think I certainly have an idea of what I think happened, but there are so many different scenarios. And it's clearly not just on Johnny's side. I mean, Johnny, I think even his family would admit that he had made mistakes in his life, but he was a pretty decent kid. Or not even a pretty decent kid, but he was a decent kid. But there were things that even on Lisa's side, I mean, she had an ex-boyfriend who had aggravated. He had kind of broke into a house, or he was a very jealous ex-boyfriend, let's say that. And just a couple years ago, he had even been charged with cracking his brother's head open with a phone, and that's but I mean, so there were people on both sides, and there were so many different possibilities, and not even to mention the fact that the method of killing. I mean, I know
that is so bizarre.
Yeah.
I mean, just so unusual. Talk about that too.
Yeah, and there was somebody a criminologist, shortly after this came out, somebody had reached out to him and wanted to go through the records, like how often has this happened in Toledo. And he went back to like 1913, and this method of killing just hadn't happened. It had not happened in Toledo, and it has not happened since. So this simply isn't a method of killing. And I think because of that, the prosecutors, the detectives, they looked into possible cartel ties. They looked into MS-13, the possibility. There was a Mexican street gang.
Because you do hear of those kinds of things happening in those situations.
Mhm.
But nothing ever came of that.
No, I mean, and that's the thing. It's very frustrating because there are so many things that you could say, oh, I can see where the cartel would have been involved or MS-13, but then you can't connect all the dots. I mean, why would they be involved? I mean, Johnny and Lisa weren't drug dealers, big time drug dealers. I mean, can we say, I mean, there's some people who said, hey, maybe there's pot exchange back and forth between friends, but they weren't big time drug dealers that a cartel would be involved in or a street gang. But I look, I mean, that's one of the reasons this story was so fascinating to me, because there's so many possibilities.
So, I mean, looking at it now, do you have more questions, even though you know so much more now? Do you have more questions than you had before?
Yeah, my photographer, Eric Rucka, I mean, we talk about this story every day. And, I think one day we have one theory, the next day we have another theory. And it is so frustrating. And what's frustrating to me is that I can't give the viewers or even people watching right now, I can't wrap this up. You see like a Netflix documentary and it's like, well, you got the big mystery and then you got the reveal at the end. This is what happened. I don't know what happened. I think I know what probably happened, but I can't say that. And the police can't say that. I think the police actually know what happened, or they have a good idea, but they can't prove it.
Okay, so that's another question going back to DNA. If they still have all those samples that were gathered from, where was the DNA mainly gathered?
It was on the duct tape at Johnny's feet. There's duct tape around his neck, inside of his sweatpants, on the phone pad of his phone, and the battery of his phone. There's DNA found.
Okay. And so there's all this DNA that's kept basically on file, tested against all the 40 people they asked for DNA.
40. There were 40 people they tested it
Okay.
against.
And there were no conclusive positive matches. And everyone really has only one DNA profile. Yours is different from mine. Mine's different from yours.
Right.
It's pretty conclusive if I leave DNA on your shirt that it's Melissa Andrews' DNA.
Yeah.
So how do we not have a DNA match with 40 people that these guys were involved with, and now all these years later?
Right. I mean, you can kind of explain away the duct tape DNA by it could have happened during the manufacturing process. So in the factory, when somebody's like wrapping the thing up, it could have been a female that transferred DNA onto that duct tape. So that's easily explained away. But when you're talking about inside his sweatpants, when you're talking about the phone keypad and the battery, I mean, the phone was thrown across the room. So somebody had taken the phone. He was getting multiple phone calls. So it's reasonable to expect that someone grabbed his phone and said, let's shut the darn thing off, and like threw it and broke it. And I think the phone was actually broken. So it's not easy to explain how that DNA got there. Because you would think somebody that committed this heinous of a crime would somehow be in CODIS for having committed some other type of crime. So, look, I mean, do the people go in there? I'm guessing they were all wearing gloves, obviously, because there wasn't DNA all over the house. So they were wearing gloves. They were probably wearing a mask.
But if you're talking about any of these people that we watch in these interrogation videos being those people, and we're not naming anyone, no one was ever charged, that seems very professional to me.
It does. And that was when I first started looking into this story, and I even told the detective when I talked to him, I'm like, it was a professional hit. There's no way. Because there were 5 inches of snow on the ground. It snowed pretty heavily the day before, and there were 5 inches. The driveway was clear, but there were no footprints around the house. So it wasn't like somebody, broke in a window or something. So they came in the door. They came in the garage door. That's obviously how they came in there. But, there's certainly some concern that the police were out at that house on 2 different occasions. Maite Clarke,
Johnny's mom.
Johnny's mom called and said she was obviously concerned because of this phone call. Can we go do a welfare check? Well, they searched around the house. Didn't see anything, didn't find probable cause to go into the house. Then they came out a second time, and again, same thing. And I mean, the police certainly took some criticism because, I mean, in my mind, there's certainly reason to believe that Johnny and Lisa were in danger at that point. It was a phone call where he's shouting, bro, what are you doing? And who the hell are you? I think he said in the phone call. I mean, that's certain. Then the call drops.
So I have a question for you, because in the documents and according to what you just said, these people, whoever they were, came in through the garage. And then from what I understand, Johnny and Lisa were like holding the garage door closed. And then you have this phone call with Tiffany Williams that you just referenced, where she overheard Johnny saying, bro, like he didn't know the person. So if the police are doing this drive-by check, going up to the door, not seeing any trouble, these people came through the garage, right? Wouldn't the garage door be open? They went in and closed it. Were there?
Yeah.
And you're not telling me when this girl's parents are out of town that these young kids are snow blowing or shoveling and keeping everything clean.
That's actually a good question. I don't know how the driveway got cleaned, but there was not snow on the driveway, but certainly whoever went into the house, they shut the garage door. I mean, that should certainly tell you something there too.
It does. Very thought out.
Yeah. So
not hurried in any way, because then later we have the idea that even the bodies were moved also.
Yeah. In my mind, I was able to see the photos, and in my mind, it looked like the bodies had been moved. Just the way the clothing had been disturbed and the way they were positioned, it looked like they had been moved. So
and there was also a phone call. One of the original phone calls, I believe it was from IT, said that they were in the basement, that they can be seen in the basement, but their bodies were actually found in the kitchen.
Yeah. And, I asked her about that because I knew some people were wondering what that was all about, but I'm also trying to put myself in her head. John had gone around to the back of the house and he's looking in, and he's back there with their cousin, I believe, and they're looking in and they see the body. He comes running around the house and says, they're in there, call the police. And she does. She's panicking, and I think she assumed that John was looking into the basement, and she was probably just making that leap in this really state of mind, just panicking that they must have been in the basement. Saw them in the basement, they're tied up.
So in my mind, there's 2 ways that this case gets solved, and there is one person in prison for it, but we know that there are other people out there, and the detectives have said that too. And one of those ways is to revisit the DNA, and another way is to renew the call for people to speak out. But one of the things that I think is a little disturbing to me is that Detective Luettke said, in regard to DNA, I'm not saying it wouldn't be used in the future, but it's not something we've embraced locally. We would have to contract with a company that does that. The way that I hear that is, I'm thinking, well, okay, contract with a company that does it locally, do the DNA. So that's a little frustrating, I think.
And that's
to hear that this is not something we've embraced locally. How did you take that?
Well, I think I took it much the same way that you did. That I just want to say, I think I asked him multiple times. I'm like, but you could.
You
And
could.
he's like, yeah, but we just have, but you could. And he's like, yeah, but this just isn't. And he's like, I'm not saying we won't in the future. This ultimately might be something
It
that
just
we
doesn't
do.
make sense because on one hand, you're saying we believe that this man who we do have in prison did not do this on his own. But then you're also saying this is not something we've embraced locally. We would have to contract with a company. So if you believe other people are out there, and DNA is certainly a way that you can find some answers, why not do the DNA?
Well, and that's one of my goals with this story. What I would like to see come out of this. Obviously, I want people to come forward and talk about, what they know. But my other big push is really to get the police to say, okay, we will go, we will contract with them, and we will get this DNA.
Is this something that's exorbitantly expensive?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I'm guessing it probably is, but when you're talking about two people's lives, I mean, a 21-year-old and a 20-year-old, I mean, I certainly don't know that there should be a cap on how much they're willing to spend in getting answers.
Talk to me about this word. I jotted it down. DINARS. What was that?
Yeah, those are Iraqi dinars. I mean, that really came into play with the snitch, Eric Yingling. He testified that Sam Williams had told him that I found Iraqi dinars in the house, and I think he called it Iraqi funny money or something like that. And I didn't know how to get rid of it, so I just left it there. And when Yingling went to the police, because he wanted a deal, he told me, and I had a conversation with him until like 2 a.m. one night, and he said, I went there and wanted a deal, and I told them just casually that, yeah, and Sam mentioned that there was some Iraqi money, and he said everybody at that point just kind of looked at each other, and they said nobody knew this information except the killers and the Straubs who had it in their house. Now, I later found out that is not true. I mean, it was on multiple media outlets just days after, because there was a search warrant that the police executed. And on that search warrant were Iraqi dinars that they were trying to get. And that information was released to the media. So people did know that. And they did ask Detective Kozak on the stand that nobody else knew this information, correct? And he said, that's correct. Nobody knew this. That was not true. So
there's a lot of interesting parts to this Yingling because he was also paid.
He was, which nobody really knew. I just casually mentioned one of the families. I'm like, did anybody ever get like any reward money? And it was mentioned that Eric Yingling did. And when I talked to him, he actually did confirm it. I said, did you get paid for your testimony? He's like, well, no, I wasn't eligible for the reward fund because I was a felon. And I'm like, did they give you money? Did someone? He's like, well, this is what it was. They considered it a stipend. They said they wanted to give me some money to move out of town. I'm like, well, how much money did they give you? He's like, well, I don't know. It's like $4,000. And he's like, but as soon as, Detective Kozak brought that money to me and handed it to me, and then he marched me down to the child support office because I owed all this money, and he made me pay off that bill. So
isn't this something though that a defense attorney would ask during the trial?
Yeah. And
did he know?
Well, Yingling was paid afterwards. So I mean, after he testified against Sam, I don't know how long afterwards, but he was paid
okay,
after
so did
the
they
fact.
ask? Did the defense attorney ask, have you made a deal or anything like that? Or at that point, had he not? I mean,
yeah, he claims that he did not get anything specifically from the police in exchange for his testimony. Now, I think he got judicial release he was in jail and he got judicial release after.
and what was he in for?
Well, he's another one of these guys. When you look at his
Oh, boy.
record, it's extremely long. But he was not paying child support, so he owed much money on child support, and I think that's why he was in jail at that point.
Well, we have gone more than 30 minutes on this, and we've touched on a lot of topics. What I think is that it's great that it's out there again. Police do want to put that call out again, and so do you, having spent so much time on this. And I'm sure the families, everyone that acknowledges that there are more people involved. So that's the biggest thing, is putting it out there and kind of refreshing everybody. I think a lot of people have forgotten details or didn't know a lot of what you found out.
Yeah. I think the one thing that really was interesting to me about this case is that there's a lot of fear surrounding it. There's a lot of people that talk to me, but they wouldn't talk to me on camera. They wouldn't talk to me being recorded. So I think that's a lot of issues that the police are having, is that I think a lot of people are scared to come forward. And
who are they afraid of?
Well, I mean, as we know, I mean, Sam Williams obviously is convicted, but we know that there's easily 4 or 5 other people involved. So those people are likely still walking around. I mean, other people have said, well, we're scared of family members coming after us for, so there's no shortage of people that they're scared of. And, my hope is that, look, it's been 10 years. Maybe something's eating away at someone, information that they know, and they're just going to come to police.
Or maybe relationships aren't as strong as they once were.
Yeah, because whoever's involved, if there are multiple people, I mean, you've got these people all probably had a strong relationship, but, that happened in another case on work. They said, over time, relationships fall apart, and maybe somebody who wasn't willing to tell before will now be willing to tell. And that's a hope.
Yeah, that's something that we can ask for. So what do you see your involvement with this being from now on? Because this is one that you've said you haven't been able to kind of wrap up in a perfect little bow.
Yeah. And I made a commitment to both families. They asked me, are you going to stick with us until we get answers? And that is my commitment. I'm like, look, I'm going to stick with it and try to get you answers. Can I promise that I'm going to get answers, next week, 10 years from now? No, I can't, but I am committed to helping in any way I can. And if anybody wants to come talk to me, tell me a story, I mean, I will listen. I will help in any way I can. If anything, just to keep pressure on, the sheriff's department to say, look, people still care about this. I think we showed that. We had pulled the analytics earlier. There's been like 75,000 people who have read these stories. We've gotten over 12,000 views on YouTube. So people are interested in this.
For all the reasons that you mentioned when we first started this video, it's just such an unusual thing.
Yeah, and the authorities need to know that people still remember Johnny Clarke and Lisa Straub, and they're not going to forget them.
I want to ask you about the families now that, you've spoken to them. Where are they in their lives right now and with all this?
Well, I mean, obviously, Johnny's family, I mean, I talked to his mom quite a bit. I mean, this isn't something you heal from. It's not something, there's that cliche that, time heals all wounds, and it doesn't. I mean, he was her firstborn child. You just don't forget that, just because it was 10 years ago.
Right.
And, the Straubs are much more private people. Well, there's no doubt. I mean, she'll text me back and forth and wondering, okay, what can I do next now that we've got this out there? I think she texted me the other day. She said, okay, so what do we do now? Do we just wait? And I'm like, well, yeah, we kind of not got to let the story kind of percolate a little bit.
And did they not want to talk to you either on camera?
No, and they really haven't done interviews. Even going back to they had like a family spokesman, way back in the day. I mean, they're very private people, and obviously it doesn't mean they care any less, but it's just the way they're dealing with, their grief. They're no longer in that house. I mean, moved away, and I can't imagine trying to stick around.
No.
So,
Well, we're going to, Brian's going to join Jeff and me live at 11 o'clock on WTOL. So just about 20 minutes from now. If you have, and we're going to answer some more questions. Jeff and I are just going to ask him what personally interests us, and again, where we go from here, some of the more interesting things that you guys have brought up as questions. And then again, if you've not viewed, it is comprehensive, much more. And I'm sure, Brian, you had to cut out a ton of stuff for time on TV that you were able to keep online.
yeah, you know what? I mean, we did 3 nights and it ends up being about 18 and a half minutes. But, you know, when we're putting this all together, I'm like, ooh, this could be 5 days. But
Or a
you
half
know,
an hour special,
or
an
a
hour
half
special.
hour.
Yeah.
Easily. I mean, there's so much more. And that's why I try to give people as much as I can online, including documents and interrogation videos. And
Yeah.
But you're right.
And it's frustrating for a reporter to have to cut down all of this months and months of work that you've done into just 3 pieces.
Yeah, I mean, there were many, many interviews that did not make the show. There were hour-long interviews that ended up being a 5-second soundbite.
Yeah. But that's the beauty of the digital world now, is all of the interrogation videos that you felt were big and important are on WTOL.com and our YouTube page. And I think a much more comprehensive layout of the story itself. All of the 3 pieces are on WTOL.com as well. Anything else?
No, you know, some people reach out to me and said, well, there's other aspects of this. Why didn't you talk about this? And I'm like, you know what? Online, I wrote more than 9,000 words, which is a small novel. So, I mean, I could write about this for weeks. And, you know, I mean, just the last thing I want to leave people with, anything, even if it's something insignificant that you think is insignificant,
Right.
talk to the police, because maybe it's something much more significant.
Could be the
than
one
you
little
think.
thing that they're looking for. Because one of the things I think you need to realize about crimes and investigation, and even journalism, is there are things that journalists may know, that detectives may know, that don't make it out into the public because why? We just can't go around saying what we know without having
Right.
the evidence to back it up.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of things I know that I'm pretty sure I know, and I just can't say it because, look, I mean, there's lots of people who weren't charged in this case, but I can't state my opinion. That's never my goal as a journalist. I always tell people, it's not my goal to give you an opinion. My goal is to give you the facts as I know them. I put this all out there, the videos, the interrogations, the interviews, the reports. I give you the facts as I know them, and it's up to you guys to really kind of figure out what you believe and kind of form your own opinions.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, this has been really fascinating, very thorough, and again, hopefully just kind of lighting the match again for these families.
Right.
And bring some more justice.
Yeah, and of course it is frustrating me at this point. Even as you said, it's very thorough, but it still feels as though there's something more I can do. And so that's why I'm really turning it over to people and say, okay, help me. I've tried to help you, now help me.
And maybe connect on the digital world too. And as you find more things, you can add them there and bring them forward to us. And we'll keep you guys posted on what more Brian turns up and if anyone comes forward with anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not going to be the last story. Last night was not the last story for this case. I mean, you know, look, I've talked about this with Johnny's mom. I mean, the dream scenario is that we're there when all the people involved are arrested and we're able to report on that and say, we told you this story, you guys helped bring this forward, and now we finally have justice for Johnny and Lisa. That's the dream.
All right, lead investigator Brian Duggar is going to be joining us live on WTOL 11 at 11 o'clock. We're going to answer some more questions, and as always, check out that digital content, and of course